to all of you who are gathered here to meet Mr. Bond. We've been waiting for this for some years. So, Modern High School welcomes you. Just 1 minute. I wish to thank Malvika and her column for arranging this visit. It's some years ago that this girl you see seated on the stage went to visit you, Mr. Bond, in Mussoorie. And you had sent a letter for the school. I know you remember it.
I remember your letter too.
Oh, thank you. And a verbal assurance from you that you would visit our school someday. Thank you for coming. Now, you said that when you were little boy, authors were just read. They were not seen or heard. I'm glad all that has changed, because now we see that you have earned film star-like status. Oh, I'm sorry, you are a film star. I read somewhere that you had a role in Sat Khun Maaf.
I'll tell you about that later.
All right. But you see the tremendous outpouring of love everywhere in the city. In fact, it's becoming a little difficult to cope with that. I've had umpteen requests from young and old. Please maybe come, and I'm afraid we had to turn them away. We are, in a way, celebrating a diamond jubilee of sorts, because I've also read that it is 60 years since you wrote your first book, Room on the Roof. 60 years, and I think you have many more than 100 books out. How many do you have?
Well, I don't count because I think it's unlucky to count, but it's over 100.
Over 100. And I know that you'll enthrall all of us with many, many stories for many, many years to come. And we hope that you'll come soon, return soon to our city and to our school. Over to Malvika. Thank you, Malvika.
Hello everyone. I don't want to come between you and Mr. Bond, but from Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet, I'd like to thank Modern High School for hosting us this morning. I'm guilty of having named the session because, one thing I remember from the time I was a schoolgirl, Mrs. Kaur was still a teacher, is that whenever a teacher entered or someone special entered, there was this sing-song, "Good morning, Mr. Whoever or Miss Whoever." So I wish all of you will do that to start the session. So over to you.
Well, good morning to all of you, and thank you. Thank you for waking me up with your greeting. I was very drowsy this morning after a tiring day yesterday and a late night. But seeing so many bright, intelligent faces before me, now I'm wide awake and ready to take your questions, to talk to you, to do anything except sing and dance, which I'm not very good at.
Good morning, sir. I'm Priyadarshinee. I teach in Modern High School and Shreetoma is our student. So both of us are here and we want to make the most of the hour that we have with you. So I think I'm going to give Shreetoma the privilege of kick-starting the session with you.
Please.
Good morning, Mr. Bond.
Morning.
Now, Mr. Bond, I'd like to take you all the way back to your childhood. Now, you had a bit of a difficult childhood. You lost your father when you were very young. You had to live with your stepfather and mother. Your grandparents passed away after that, so it was a little difficult. So against the backdrop of that childhood, what kind of importance did books have? I mean, was it security? Was it escapism? What was it?
Yes, books played a very important part in my childhood, especially after I lost my father, which happened when I was about 10 years old. And so I did, when in discovering books, I did then turn to them a good deal for companionship, and you couldn't ask for better companions or friends than books, really. And they've sustained me all through my life. And as you say, I did have a difficult childhood, but so do many of you. I don't think childhood is smooth sailing at all. And you all have problems. And actually, one way of solving them is to become a reader, a good reader. And that's what I did. In those days, it wasn't easy always to get books to read. Only a few good schools had libraries. Big cities had a few bookshops. But if you were living in a small town tucked away somewhere, you really had to go in search of books. And if you were living in a house where there weren't any, then what did you do? So I used to go to a neighbor's house and ask and see what books there were. And so I ended up reading almost everything that came my way, and very, very quickly, from children's books to adult books, and found I was reading everything from classics to comics to romantic novels to even books on history and geography. So, which was a wonderful thing, because it meant I ended up with a great many interests.
We wanted to ask you this because for most writers, we've noticed that there's always this kind of an autobiographical element in what they write. And particularly, one story that comes to mind is The Untouchable, which you wrote, I think, when you were very, very young. Yes. So how much of it do you think, affects the way you write? And, that was when you were very young, and now, so if you could carry us through that.
Yes, the story you mentioned was published in 1952, the year after I finished school, and which was when I started writing stories, but it was many years before I became reasonably well known. So I think because I started so young, I did have to fall back on my own life, people I'd known, friends, relatives, and so I've perhaps always written about those I have known, or events or things that I've experienced. So you really get two kinds of writers. You get the subjective writer, the writer who writes out of his or her own life. Writers like, say, Emily Bronte or her sister Charlotte Bronte, or Virginia Woolf, or very often they're women writers who are perhaps more personal and subjective. Or then you get the very objective writer who's really telling you maybe a thrilling adventure story, and those are usually the very popular ones. So you get I'm more of the kind of writer who writes out of his own life. And I'm lucky, because the older you get, the more you have to write about, because you have so many memories, you've known so many people, friends, family. So you don't run out of people, and books and stories are about people. And if I do run out of people, I write ghost stories. You can always cook up a ghost or two when there's nothing else is happening. I don't know if your maybe principal doesn't approve of you reading ghost stories. It gives you you don't want to get embedded in superstition for the rest of your lives. And to honestly tell you the truth, although I've written ghost stories, trying to scare you all, I've never really met a ghost. I just make them up.
Mr. Bond, just to go back to your father, I'm really sorry I'm being repetitive, but You know, your relationship with your father has shown through in many different ways, be it the tiger in the tunnel or a direct reference to him in Remember This Day. You know what, recently I came across a letter your father wrote to you, and it was very special because it was the last letter he wrote to you.
That's true, and it came from Kolkata. If you look at the
Yes.
address in the right-hand corner, it says
It does say Calcutta.
Air Force Outpost, Kolkata, September 1944. That was, World War II was on. India was close to independence. So much was happening. And that's the only letter I managed to save because I had a very sensible, silly headmaster who offered to look after all my letters and keep them safe for me. And when I came to at the end of the term and said, "Sir, can I have my letters?" He fumbled, he looked, he searched. He'd lost them, forgotten about them. So, and he was probably, I put it down to sheer absent-mindedness. It certainly wasn't deliberate. But a small boy does sometimes feel these things. And,
Sir, was it the same headmaster who tore up your book?
No, that was another one.
Oh, okay.
that was a housemaster. When
I believe you wrote about his
I
wife.
was in class 8 or 9 and I wrote a story, but I said some funny things about my classmaster. And he got hold of
his
it.
wife, I believe, sir. As
There,
well as
there
his
were
wife.
references to the beauty of his wife also in that one?
Maybe, yes. So anyway, anyway, he tore up my story, and that was the end of my first book. So if you're going to, while you're still at school, write books or stories, don't put your teachers in them, huh? Don't put your don't write about your teachers.
So, sir, what surprised me was that this letter was written during the war. Your father was serving in the Air Force.
That's right, and he passed away here in Kolkata.
He did that.
Yes,
and
indeed.
in spite of that, you know, he describes like he collected stamps with you.
Oh,
he
yes,
took
a
you
great
to
stamp
books. He took you to Newmarket, for instance. You know,
He was promising to take me to the new market. Huh?
that didn't happen.
Where it didn't happen.
You know what, sir? What surprised me was that this was a father who had the time to spend some time with his son during the war. And today we see that in the rush of urban life, quality time with your children is substituted, for instance, by an increased pocket money. So because you're so close to children, what do you feel about children who don't get to experience that parent-child relationship?
Well, those were different times, and also that was an era when people wrote letters, and that seems to have passed now because letter writing takes up time, and everybody is so busy doing various things that, and yet my father did have time to every week sit down and write a 4-page letter. So I still think letters are important, and if you when all of you grow up and have families, I hope you'll stay in touch, not simply on the Facebook, but also in a more personal way.
We just have to ask you this, and I ask this from a very personal note because I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with my grandparents. And I think you also did get a lot of time with your grandparents. And now with how things are changing and nuclear families being what it is, I mean, would you like to tell us a bit about your time shared with your grandparents, the legacy that they've left behind with you? Because I'm sure the children would gain enormously from that.
You see, I have to make a confession. I didn't know my grandparents, but I always wanted to have a grandfather who was full of fun and adventure, and a homely grandmother who would cook lovely things for me. But both my grandparents died before I was born, my grandfathers, both grandfathers. And only one grandmother I knew, and she was very strict and stern. She certainly wouldn't cook chocolates or cakes for me. But perhaps because of the problems of growing up, I wanted to have grandparents. And I still want to have a grandfather and a grandmother, but if I did, they'd be probably 200 years old or more. So I invented grandparents. Huh? So I invented this eccentric, lovely grandfather who kept animals and pets. And I invented a grandmother who loved cooking, and whereas my real grandmother wouldn't go in the kitchen. So you see, writers can make up things, but you do it sometimes for maybe a psychological reason, to compensate for something that you haven't had in life. And so you create someone, and you, in the end, I sometimes believe I really did have these grandparents, because I made them so interesting and fun-loving and nice. So sometimes when people ask me, you had those, as you did, interesting grandparents, I said, yes, I did.
We were really caught up by the magic, so they seem so real when you've written about them. And today we realize that, I mean, they are a mastery of your craft, maybe. Shreetoma.
Sir, I'm a villain at doing this. I'll bring you back to something that did happen, and perhaps something that wasn't very enjoyable. You left India at about the age of 17, and you went to live in England, the Jersey and the Channel Islands, and you came to really hate that. You worked a number of jobs which you detested.
No, I didn't detest them all, but she certainly knows more about me than I do at that time. I had some interesting jobs, yes, including one when I worked for briefly for a travel agent in Jersey in the Channel Islands, and the lady that Thomas Cook and Sons had sent out to run this office employed me as an assistant, and I was very inexperienced, and she started having a love affair with a gentleman who sold second-hand fire extinguishers. And so she wasn't in the office much, and I had to handle this telephone, people wanting me to book rooms in hotels for either long married couples or honeymooners, and I would get all jumbled up. And until today, I get confused between double beds and single beds and what's it called? Twin beds. Twin beds. So people who wanted double beds were being given twin beds, and people who wanted twin beds were being given double beds. And the result, I think that people were getting divorced or married as a result of it.
So did you last out in that job for very long?
No, she fired me, and then they fired her. And even the gentleman who sold fire extinguishers deserted her and went away. So it all ended very sadly.
Sir,
But
oh, yes.
no, that's it. All right.
In the middle, oh, sorry.
So I also then went and I went and got another job.
So, you know, in the middle of all this chaos and hullabaloo and the number of relationships that were broken and the relationships that were broken after that, you know, what's surprising is that Channel Islands is actually where your writing career really took off. That's where you met Diana Antill. That's where you got your first typewriter. That's where you wrote Room on the Roof.
Well, when the year before I left India, I had been keeping a journal. So that was 1951 Dehradun. And when I was in Jersey in the Channel Islands and feeling very homesick and missing my friends, I started turning this journal into a novel. And it was then, after leaving Jersey, after I got thrown out of various jobs and went to London, that I submitted the novel